Something has been lurking underneath one family's garage the whole time they've been living there. A secret room.
Shawn swung the crowbar, expecting to hit dirt. Instead, it hit steel with a hollow clang that echoed through the whole house. He froze. The air that hissed out of the crack didn't smell like mold or rot. It smelled like fresh oil and electricity. He looked at his wife Caroline, and they both knew they should stop. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. They pried the hole wider, shining a flashlight into the abyss. What stared back at them was a door painted with a warning that had been forbidden for 80 years. The cold spot in the floor. In August of 2025, life was normal for Shawn and Carolyn Tullier. They were just an average couple living on the island of Guernsey, a quiet spot in the English Channel known for its beaches and history. They wanted to update their home before the winter set in. You know the drill: new floors, fresh paint, maybe fix up the wiring. It was supposed to be a simple weekend project. But here's the catch. While Shawn was prying up old linoleum in the kitchen, his crowbar struck something that didn't feel like concrete. It wasn't wood either. It made a deep, hollow sound, a metallic thud that vibrated up his arm. He stopped. The room went silent. At first he assumed it was just a pipe or maybe an air pocket in the foundation. He struck it again, harder this time. The sound was unmistakable. There was a void beneath them. Curious and maybe a little reckless, he chipped away the surrounding cement. What he found made his blood run cold. Embedded in the earth was a heavy steel plate, welded shut along the seams. It wasn't rusty or corroded like you would expect from something buried for decades. It was smooth, unnaturally smooth. Shawn took off his glove and pressed his hand against the metal. It was freezing. Not just cold from the ground, but icy, as if the air on the other side was being refrigerated. Caroline wanted to call a contractor immediately. She had a bad feeling about it, but Shawn grabbed the grinder. He had to know. As the blade cut through the first weld, a pressurized hiss filled the kitchen. It sounded like opening a vacuum-sealed jar. And get this, the smell that drifted up wasn't stale air or rot. It smelled like ozone, machine oil, and something sharp, like antiseptic. It smelled like a hospital room that had been cleaned yesterday. They managed to lift the plate just enough to shine a flashlight into the darkness. Below them wasn't a dirt pit. It was a staircase. Concrete steps, painted gray, descending into total blackness. And at the bottom, caught in the beam of the light, stood a massive steel blast door. The red paint on the door was still bright. Scratched across the front in jagged white letters were the words BEF Verboten, British Expeditionary Force, Forbidden. But underneath that, in smaller, precise German script, was a warning that translated to Strictly No Entry, Biological Hazard. The couple backed away. They called the local heritage office the next morning. When the team of historians and engineers arrived, they treated it like a standard World War II find. The Channel Islands are full of old bunkers. They expected to find some rusty rifles, maybe a few old helmets, standard stuff. But the moment they cut the final seal on that blast door, the mood shifted. This wasn't a bunker for soldiers. The hallway inside was pristine. Cables ran neatly along the walls, color-coded in yellow and blue. There was no dust, no cobwebs. It looked like the crew had just clocked out for a lunch break. One of the engineers, a guy who had mapped dozens of these sites, turned pale. He pointed out the ventilation ducts. There was a faint vibration in the walls. The air was moving. Somewhere deep down in the dark, a machine was still running. And that meant power. They moved deeper, their boots echoing on the metal grating. Near the back of the first corridor, Shawn spotted a wheel lock on the floor. It was a heavy submarine-style hatch. The historian on site froze. He recognized the design. This wasn't a standard military lock. This specific mechanism was only used in high-security research facilities, places that didn't officially exist on any map. They tried the wheel. It turned smoothly. Grease, fresh and slick, coated the gears. As the hatch groaned open, revealing a ladder dropping into a second, deeper level, everyone realized the truth. This wasn't a shelter. It was a vault. And whatever was down there had been kept alive for 80 years. The wheel turned and the darkness below seemed to breathe. A phone that never rang. The team descended the ladder, the air getting colder with every step. The temperature dropped to near freezing. At the bottom, they found themselves in a narrow corridor that looked more like a science fiction set than a 1940s ruin. The walls were lined with white tiles, spotless and gleaming. On the left, a door was labeled Storage 3. On the right, Lab A. They opened the storage room first. It was packed from floor to ceiling. But it wasn't weapons, it was survival gear. There were drums of water, sealed perfectly. There were crates of rations, thousands of them. And strangely, there were rows of oxygen tanks. An engineer checked the date stamped on the metal, late 1944. Everything was brand new, unused. It looked like they were stocking up for a siege that was expected to last for years, or maybe decades. The room was organized with terrifying precision. Work tables were clean. Instruments, microscopes, scales, beakers were arranged in perfect rows. At the back of the room, a massive ventilation unit was mounted to the wall. When an engineer plugged a portable battery into the system to test the circuit, the fans whirred to life instantly. The bearings were silent. The engineering was flawless. In the center of the room was a wide planning table covered in maps. But these weren't battle maps. They were nautical charts of the Atlantic. Red threads connected the Channel Islands to specific deepwater points off the coast of France and Spain. There were no notes explaining the route, just the threads forming a web that pointed away from Europe. Beside the table, a black rotary phone was bolted to the wall. The receiver was wrapped in wax paper, preserved. It was eerie. It felt like the phone might ring at any second. Then they found the crates against the back wall. These weren't for food, they were labeled Versuchsperson, test subject. The team pried the lid off the first crate. Inside, packed in straw, were glass jars filled with a cloudy yellow fluid. Floating inside were tissues, biological samples. One engineer, a man who had seen plenty of war relics, gagged and had to step out. He swore he saw a limb, small, thin, like a primate or a child, with metal pins fused directly into the bone. Next to the crate stood a tall glass cylinder, cracked but holding together. Inside was a dark shape suspended in thick liquid. It looked like a small mammal, maybe a dog, but tubes were surgically implanted into its neck and spine. A silver tag on the rim read, "Special Specimen." This wasn't just a lab, it was a modification center. The silence in the room was heavy. The team started to realize that the bunker wasn't built to protect people from bombs. It was built to protect the experiments from the world. The level of technology here was impossible for the time period. The wiring, the preservation methods, the surgical implants, it was years ahead of its time. And the question shifted from, "What is this?" to "Who could possibly build this?" The answer was hidden in a stack of blueprints left on a drafting desk. The signature at the bottom was a simple, jagged scrawl, but to the historians it was a name that stopped their hearts. It linked this tiny basement in Guernsey to the darkest, most secretive chapter of the entire war. The name on the blueprint belonged to the ghost of the regime. Designed to disappear. The signature read Hans Kammler. If you don't know that name, you should. Kammler was the SS general in charge of the most top-secret projects of the Third Reich. He wasn't a soldier, he was an architect and an engineer. He was the man who built the underground rocket factories. He was the one who designed the facilities that were meant to be invisible. Finding his signature here, in a small house in Guernsey, was like finding a fingerprint of a ghost. Historians immediately began comparing the layout of this bunker to Kammler's other known works. The similarities were undeniable. Kammler had a signature style, twin corridors. He built parallel hallways, one for general staff and one for the secret cargo. This bunker had that exact design. A concrete divider split the main hall, hiding the movement of whatever or whoever was being transported. The investigation team pulled records from the archives. In 1943, Kammler made a documented visit to the Channel Islands under the code name Operation Unknown X. The files on this mission were heavily redacted, blacked out by intelligence agencies after the war. But a few words survived the censor's ink: biological trials and Atlantic corridor. Basically, the theory is terrifying. Experts now believe Kammler wasn't just visiting, he was setting up a fallback point, a place to continue the research that couldn't be done in Germany anymore as the Allies closed in. The design of the Guernsey bunker matched perfectly with another facility discovered years later in the mountains of Austria, a place called Berg Crystal. That facility was also linked to weaponizing physics and biology, the same ventilation systems, the same blast doors, the same obsession with sealing things in. But here is the deal. Kammler was famous for making things disappear. He specialized in deniability. If a base was at risk, he designed it to be self-contained, sealed, and forgotten. He didn't want these places destroyed, he wanted them preserved, like time capsules waiting for the right moment to be opened again. The engineers found a drainage system in the bunker that didn't go to the sewer. It went straight down hundreds of feet into the natural limestone caves of the island. It was an escape hatch for waste, or evidence. The realization hit the team hard. This wasn't a military outpost, it was a sanctuary for science that had no ethics. Kammler had designed a place where the laws of nature and the laws of man didn't apply. And the fact that it was here under a civilian house meant that he wanted it to be hidden in plain sight. As they analyzed the structure, they found something even more disturbing. The walls of the lower level were lined with lead, thick sheets of it. You don't use lead for biological experiments, you use lead for radiation. Kammler was mixing two very different, very dangerous sciences. The lead walls were hiding something that burned hotter than fire. A child's drawing of war. The deeper the team pushed into the facility, the less it felt like a building and the more it felt like a tomb. But not a tomb for the dead, a tomb for the living who had just stepped out. They started finding personal items, and this is where the story gets heartbreaking. In a corner of the hallway, near a collapsed section of shelving, they found a pair of shoes. Small leather shoes, a woman's size. They were placed neatly side by side, toes pointing toward the exit. Next to them was a brooch with a fake pearl. It was the kind of thing you'd wear to a dinner, not a bunker. It seemed like the people working here were civilians, or at least they lived like them. In a filing room next to Lab A, the team finally cut open a locked metal cabinet. Inside, they found the emotional wreckage of the crew. There were stacks of envelopes tied together with twine. The paper was brown and brittle, but the handwriting was legible. They were letters, dozens of them. Dates ranged from March to late April 1945. These were the final days. The letters were addressed to families in Berlin, Munich, and Hamburg, but there were no postmarks. They had never been sent. One letter written in shaky script read, "My dearest, if I do not come home, know that I followed orders I no longer believe in. The things we have done here will haunt the earth." Another note, unsigned, contained a phrase that baffled the translators. "The subjects sleep without dying. We are preparing them for the long voyage." What does that mean? Sleep without dying? Was it a metaphor? Or were they talking about suspended animation? The prompt about biological moderation started to make a sick kind of sense. At the bottom of the cabinet, buried under the paperwork, lay a single sheet of drawing paper. It was a child's drawing done in wax crayon. It showed a man in a uniform holding a red balloon. On the back, a woman had written, "For father, hurry home." The room went dead silent. The researchers looked at each other. There were families down here, children. The people running this lab weren't just faceless monsters, they were parents who were terrified. On the metal doorframe leading to the next section, someone had taken a piece of white chalk and written a message. It was smeared but readable. "Wir kommen wieder. We will return." Was it a promise, a threat, or was it just a desperate hope? The evidence showed a rapid, organized evacuation. Papers were filed, chairs were pushed in, equipment was covered. They didn't run in a panic, they left with a plan. They packed up the most critical items and sealed the rest behind them. But there was one room they didn't empty, one room they sealed tighter than all the others. The letters mentioned the cargo over and over again. "The cargo is ready. The cargo is unstable." The team approached the final bulkhead. It was marked Experiment 5. The radiation counters on their belts clicked once, then twice. The closer they got, the faster the clicking became. Outro. Did the crew really escape with the core, or is it still buried under the collapsed tunnel waiting to be dug up? If you think some history should stay hidden, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications because we are just scratching the surface.